Strict instructions were given by Mountbatten to his photographers that whenever they clicked his picture, they should keep the camera 6 inches above his eyeline. In that way, his wrinkles didn't show up in the picture. There were few people in the world who were more concerned about what history would say about them than Mountbatten. When Field Marshal Montgomery visited India and the reporters requested both Mountbatten and Montgomery to pose together so that they can get a picture of both of them together in one frame, Mountbatten became insecure. He was hesitant. You know why? Because Montgomery had more medals on his chest. That insecure person he was. His colleagues often used to call him the vainest man alive. Vain here means a person who holds himself to a very high regards. Self-obsessed person. During his tenure in India, he travelled with a team of photographers who ensured that all the important moments were documented. He believed that he was the savior of India and the chief architect of India's partition. His immediate predecessor, Lord Wavell, was just an opposite character. He did not think much about his image. He was least bothered about what history would say about him. In fact, it was Wavell who should get most of the credit for initiating the end of British rule from the British side. He was relatively more sympathetic towards the Indian aspirations. It was Lord Wavell who did all the discussions and negotiations and came up with a clear timetable for the British withdrawal. But the British government back in England wanted that the last rites should be done by a more flamboyant character, and hence Mountbatten ended up as the last Viceroy of India. Wavell was an old feeble guy, so the British did not wanted that someone like a Wavell should do the last dramatic gestures. Now, after Mountbatten left India, he commissioned a whole array of books which sought to magnify his success and cover up his failures. He projected India versus Pakistan, Congress versus Muslim League, Gandhi versus Jinnah, and Nehru versus Patel as squabbling schoolboys fighting over silly things, and projected himself as an umpire, as a judge who successfully mediated between these silly schoolboys fighting over useless things. In one of his delusional writings, he claimed that it was only after his advice that Nehru included Patel in his cabinet. Imagine the level of delusion and narcissism this person had. For Partition, he takes the credit to have solved the greatest geopolitical problems of all times. In reality, he accelerated the partition time, which was about to happen by 1948. He accelerated it to 1947, leading to massive chaos and bloodshed. But he portrayed this decision as a masterstroke, something that saved India from worse conflict. 2 million people dead and 20 million people homeless, out of their livelihood. What worse was he imagining? It was his desire to leave India with a clean slate and wanted to return to England quickly with the legacy of having solved the Indian problems. He also had the habit of inflating his own military achievements. Back in World War II, he was a naval officer. He continued to be a naval officer even after India's independence. But that time, he was commanding a destroyer called HMS Kelly. This ship had mixed record, not very good, not very bad, but the ship was eventually sunk by the enemy forces, by the Axis forces. Mountbatten exaggerated his achievements and presented himself as a hero. There was a movie made on this incident later on. Mountbatten carefully curated his portrayal in the movie to enhance his personal reputation. The name of the movie is In Which We Serve. He also ensured that India's independence was on 15th August 1947 because 15th August 1945, Imperial Japanese forces surrendered, and he was the supreme allied leader, supreme allied commander in Southeast Asia. So it was his deliberate choice which speaks volumes of his ego and desire to associate India's independence with his personal achievements. He was also the architect of the disastrous Dieppe raid. Dieppe is a city in France which was, during World War II, was captured by the Germans and was under the Nazi control. He sent about 600 Allied soldiers to attack that city, which resulted in the massacre of 900 Canadian soldiers. 2,000 were captured by the Nazis and 2,500 severely wounded. Now, the entire credit of this disaster goes to Mountbatten, and this incident has been heavily downplayed and completely rugged under the carpet from his biography. As the saying goes, until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunters. This saying aptly reflects the British colonial era, where history is often penned by the British officers who ensured that their narratives portrayed them in a favorable light. By doing this, the British sought to justify and legitimize their dominion, casting themselves as progressive and benevolent ruler rather than oppressors.